So, it continues. Hello there, friend. Welcome back to Max's Finish It Challenge 2016. At the start of the year, I told myself, you know what, Max, you don't finish anywhere near enough things. So I thought, let's make 2016 the year about finishing things. Every week, I've been finishing a random assortment of things, from video games to movies to anime to books. And this week, I have an all-new review just for you. But before I go anywhere, I want to remind you that last week I reviewed a very interesting and cool game called 999. 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors, I believe. That game is really good and you should go watch the review. But anyhow, what am I reviewing this week? This week, we're going back to the world of literature and entering the most grim, dark children's book ever. What am I reviewing? I'm starting what is most likely going to be Lemony Snicket month by reviewing the first 3 books of a series of unfortunate events. Is this series of events one for the books? Let's find out. So let's dive right in. What is this series of books about, and what books did I read? As a quick overview, it is entirely likely that you have already heard about these books or that you even read them growing up, in which case you already know what you're in for. But if you don't, let me explain to you. A series of unfortunate events is a series of children books, though I would not describe them as so, written by Lemony Snicket. The books follow the unfortunate Baudelaire? Let's say Baudelaire. No one can answer me how you're supposed to pronounce their last name, but the Baudelaire orphans, who have their entire life turned around on the very first chapter, and from there on continue through what you could call a series of unfortunate events. As I mentioned previously, these kids are now unfortunately orphans, and with their parents dead and their big mansion burned to the ground, their inheritance is locked away in a bank, and they go along stumbling from relative to relative, finding someone who can actually take care of them while still battling away their terrible foe, Count Olaf. This first video encompasses the first 3 books in the series: The Bad Beginning, The Reptile Room, and The Wide Window. Now that you know what these books are actually about, let's dive right in. What were the things that I enjoyed about these books? What were the good things? So right off the bat, there's something I need to talk about right now. And it's one of the things that I've been talking about forever in writing. For kids that you don't know, I write books for a living. And I create writing advice videos on this very channel. And I talk about writing, and there's one thing that I've been saying forever, and it is that you can tell when someone is having fun writing. And Daniel something, I forget his real name, but Lemony Snicket is having so much freaking fun writing these books. You can tell right on the page that there are moments in which either I could imagine him writing and like looking at the distance and going, this is a really clever line, or just laughing to himself. In the books, and this becomes more evident later on, but Lemony Snicket himself is a character within these books. So the person writing the books exists in the world with the characters in which the books are set in. It's really interesting and fun, but one of the best things about these books in general is that Lemony Snicket addresses the audience, addresses you as the reader, conjugation 101, addresses you the reader every once in a while. Like at the very opening of the book, he tells you, hey, this story is very sad, and if you like stories about happy things happening, don't read this book. You should put it down. And one of my favorite moments is generally, and this happens like once every book, before something bad is really about to happen, he literally stops and goes, you know what? Something bad is really gonna happen right now. You should just stop reading. You know what? You should just go put this book down and pretend that all these bad things are never going to happen, and you can just go on with your merry own way and imagine that something awesome and happy happened to these kids. And the thing that gets me the most is that it doesn't feel like it's breaking the fourth wall, because it doesn't feel like it's out of character. It feels as though someone is telling you this report, telling you this story, and at times, in the midst of telling this story, they realize, you know what, this is really sad, you should just stop reading. You know what, you should just go put the book away, because it's only gonna get worse from here on. If you want to see just solid, clean writing and narration, these books are a great example. And you may be thinking to yourselves, Max, these are children books, how can I learn from them? You are so wrong, because my second point, are these actually children's books? Because here's something. I read these books, and I'm 26 right now, and I found like no moment in which I felt I was being talked down to as though I was a child that needed to be reminded, hey, you're a kid, let me explain everything to you. There are moments of explanation, and Lemony Snicket really quickly turns teaching you words into jokes, basically, but there is never a point in which I felt that if I was like a 10-year-old kid reading these books, I would be talked down to. There's never a point where I'm like, wow, if I was a kid, I would be like, yeah, thanks for reminding me I'm a kid reading your books. And also additionally, all three of the Baudelaire orphans are like really smart, and the adults treat them like they're idiots. And the best thing that gets me is that the adults are useless. The adults are incompetent in these books, and almost to the extent that it is almost infuriating. Mr. Poe is 100% garbage. But I sit here and I'm like, these kids are the smartest characters in these freaking books. And I don't know, like I look back and I'm like, if I had read these when I was little, I might have become like a different person entirely, probably a funnier person, because these books are hilarious. And there's one more thing that I really enjoyed in these books, and it's the thing that if it had been done wrongly, it would have immediately turned these books into like super talk down to you're a kid, let me explain things in a way you can understand because you're a child sort of books. Throughout the story, there are moments in which a word is dropped, a word that may be a bit of a strange word that, people may not know what it means, and Lemony Snicket in narration takes a moment to explain what that word means. He does basically, in this case, this word means this, and he does that seriously like twice. And ever since after that, every time he stops to define a word, he doesn't use a textbook description, he uses a description that makes it funny for the case at hand. Like the kids are looking out at the countryside and they see a lot of small, quaint houses. And in narration, Lemony Snicket stops and says, in this situation, quaint means short little houses that look as though they're about to fall apart at any minute. And I love that. I actually really like that because it takes this idea of explaining something to the audience that could super easily be talking down to somebody and makes it funny and makes it a joke. And seriously, he does that. He explains what words mean seriously like twice. Twice in the first book, and then ever after that it's just jokes. And with that being said, I really enjoyed a lot about this book. It's really funny, but let's talk about the things I did not enjoy so much. The bad things, of which there are very little. The writing in these books is really freaking solid. There are a couple of things that I'm putting here. They're not really complaints for me, but there are things you need to keep an eye out for if you're interested in checking out this series. Now, this is something that I knew coming into the story. Lady Kitty Lynn, a friend of the channel, actually lent me her entire collection of books, and she's like, yeah, one of the problems with these books is that you can kind of tell what the pattern is. And yeah, there's a pattern to these books. There's 13 of them, so it's understandable that there ends up being a pattern eventually. The kids move to a new place and a new guardian, and that guardian suffers a terrible fate, and Count Olaf is probably at fault for that one way or another. There's a pattern to these books. I think the fun to this pattern, though, is to see how things develop. Immediately, from book 1 to book 2, we get a completely new spin on things, and to book 3, things immediately change as well, and honestly, not kidding you. When I finished book 3, I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to wait 2 weeks to read book 4. No. I kinda want to just start reading book 4, but I didn't have the time for that, so I was like, yes, there's a pattern. I don't mind it. Other people out there may, feel a little turned off, or may believe that maybe Lemony Snicket can't pull off that same pattern for 10 more books, so we'll have to wait and see. For now, yes, it is very clear that there's a pattern to these books. The other second point that I have for that may be a negative to some people. It's not a negative to me because I understand it and it's part of the storytelling, but the adults in these stories are bloody incompetent. They are bloody incompetent. Even Uncle Monty. I know some of you out there really like Monty, but he's not like a great person. He's okay. All of the adults in these books are incredibly incompetent, and it's funny because the kids are like the only ones who are paying attention. And I know I talked about this on Twitter, and I guess this is a mild spoiler, I guess. The books tell you in the back, terrible things happen to these children, but something terrible happened in book 2, and the kids, I guess, main guardian, the guy who's actually keeping their family's inheritance in the bank, Mr. Poe, is freaking useless. Mr. Poe is terrible. And at one point, he literally turns to the children and go, "Remember when you thought this was happening? Wasn't that stupid?" And the kids went, "But it did happen! Count Olaf murdered this person!" And Mr. Poe goes, "That's not the point, kids." I'm like, Mr. Poe and a lot of the adults in this story, especially the aunt from book 3, are infuriating, and they make me angry in that sort of level that I haven't felt like this about anyone in a really long while. And if you're somebody with a really short temper, I could easily see somebody throwing the book across the room because the adults are just so incompetent. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, these kids can take care of themselves so well because they're really smart. Everyone else around them is a freaking idiot. But I know that that's the point. I know that it's supposed to make you feel infuriated, and I like that writing-wise, it really makes you feel for them. And I have to give Mr. Lemony Snicket props, because I would not feel this way if I didn't care about the kids. If I didn't look at the kids and I felt like they were being treated unfairly by these incompetent adults. Yes, some characters in these stories are going to make you really angry. I think that's part of the fun, because most of them die, but just a bit fair of warning, if you have an anger problem, you may not want to read these books. And now you've heard the good, you've heard the bad, though there was a little bit of good along the way. I really did enjoy these books, but anyhow, I think it's time. It is finally time to talk about the one and only, The Award. Considering the first 3 books of a series of unfortunate events, I think it's time to consider what summarizes this series in a nutshell, and I have to, from the bottom of my heart, give books 1 through 3 of a series of unfortunate events the most accurate series title award. Seriously, like Lemony Snicket spends the first page of like every book being like, hey, this book is not happy. And also like the book blurb on the back is like, please don't read these books. They're so sad. Put them back in the shelf. You don't have to read these books. They are terrible. And what I love the most, and I didn't talk about this before, but what I love the most about these books is that Lemony Snicket, the voice of his character and / the narrator is so good because he spoils you the deaths. He's going to tell you, hey, this person, they're not dead yet. And I imagine myself like as a little lass reading these books and going, oh no. And I know that I'm really like gushing about these books, but like honestly, and I'm looking at the pile of books that's sitting in the corner of my desk, but it's like I never caught a single moment of talking down to people, and it's weird for me because like these don't feel like children books because they're so sad. They're sad and terrible. And if you remember, a while back, Kitty and I and Plaguesworth did a collab where we played the Jackbox Party Pack, and in that game there's a particular minigame called Quiplash, in which the goal is to answer a question as funny as possible and get points from the other players. It's kind of like Cards Against Humanity, but there's actually a numerical value to your points. And the question that I had to ask them, because it was my turn to ask a question, was, write the name of a book series by a person who hates children. And Plaguesworth had a really funny joke, but Kitty's answer was a series of unfortunate events. And the more I read, the more on point this is, because terrible things happen to these children. And it's always just heartbreaking, see them go through all these terrible people, but it's also really satisfying when they emerge and kind of manage to find their way to succeed beyond all of these madness. But anyhow, I know I am super gushing. I really wanted to get that joke in there, and I am going to be doing my spoiler end-slate at the end of this video, so if you want to go catch what I thought about each particular book, I'm going to talk about it in there, but there will be spoilers. For the time being though, do I recommend this book series so far by the strength of the first 3 books? Yeah, absolutely. Again, I know it's weird to say this, but like, I don't see this as children books, only for the matter that the main characters are kids. The writing is solid, it's legitimately funny, and it has those moments of narration where like Lemony Snicket spins the camera around and he just talks to the camera for like a second. There's a moment in the first book where he explains the difference between literally and figuratively, and then that becomes a part of the plot. It's just so good. It's just so good. I really enjoyed these books, and you know, the best thing is like you can just go to your public library and check them out. I'm pretty sure they have got to be there, and I absolutely recommend them. And honestly, I can't wait to keep working through that pile of books because there's 10 more books to go, and I can't wait to see where the story progresses. So there you have it. These are my thoughts on a series of unfortunate events, book 1, 2, and 3. There's a link to these 3 books in the description down below if you want to go check them out. And before I go, I almost forgot. If you want to know what I'm going to be reviewing next week, click the mystery link in the description down below to get a sneak peek as to what is going to be reviewed next week. It may surprise you. Or it may not! Who knows? For the time being, I want to thank you for watching. If you have comments, ideas, or just recommendations for things you would like me to play, watch, and read, leave them in the comments down below. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me, and let's make 2016 the year of finishing things. Okay? Okay. Hello there, welcome back to the spoilerific end-slate! For a series of unfortunate events, book 1, 2, and 3, let's do a really quick rundown of what I thought of the books. The Bite beginning. Really solid writing right off the start. Seriously, like, having Lemony Snicket explain to you the difference between literally and figuratively, and then having that be part of the plot later on was really funny. Also, I know, and this is gonna be a theme for later on, but I love the fact that the kids are the smartest people. They still have flaws. They still have I don't want to say problems because they're kids. I mean, come on. But they are not perfect people, but they are probably the smartest people in this entire book series. Meanwhile, the adults are super flawed, and like, I know somebody out there's gonna be like, but Monty was a good guy, and I'm like, we'll get there in a moment. But I'm like, in book 1, the judge, I'm like, she seems nice, but wow, was it easy to get her to do something mildly illegal, wasn't it? Just offer her a moment in the spotlight, and then she's like, ooh, I'll do anything you ask me to. And I'm like, She sure seemed nice, but she sure also wanted to be a star. Also, Count Olaf as an antagonist is really funny, especially, and I love this so much, in every book, the instant he shows up, the kids immediately know. They're like, that's Count Olaf. I'm like, that's Count Olaf. In any other book series, they would spend like half the book being like, wait a minute, could it be? Is that Count Olaf? In this book series, literally, he steps off a taxi in book 2, and they're like, oh, that's Count Olaf. Or in book 3, he just shows up at the pier, and the kids are like, oh, that's Count Olaf. I love that. I love that the kids are way smarter than everyone else. Book 2! Okay, Uncle Monty, up until this point, he's probably the nicest out of all of the adults that has had to look after the children. Let's keep in mind, though, that he was really, like, self-centered and really wanted fame and fortune and seemed really bitter about the way people treated him at, like, the scientific community. And let us not forget that instead of taking a crew of people to Peru like any other scientist would do, he would only take his adopted children because they posed no threat to his scientific discoveries. I know. He's definitely the best. He's definitely the best so far. Especially when we get to book 3. But he wasn't perfect. But also the incredibly deadly Viper is like... That's like an animal version of Viper from my books. But anyhow. Book 3. I forget the aunt's name because... Not because she was forgettable, but because I really don't remember if it was Lorraine or was her... No, it was Aunt Josephine. It was Aunt Josephine Lorraine, wasn't it? I don't know. Aunt Josephine, from book 3, The White Window. That lady was bad from the get-go, and I felt sorry for her. And then she spends the rest of the book proving me that she wasn't a good person. And then, woo, that final confrontation. And the fact that this lady who you were asked to look after these freaking children, and you sold them out like this. No. I love that. I think it was book 3 where Lemony Snicket was like, "Don't worry, nobody's pushing Aunt Josephine off a boat just yet. No, nobody's going to. No, he said no one is pushing Aunt Josephine off a boat. Period. Next line. Not yet." Perfect. Really quickly, have I enjoyed these books? Yes, I have. Can you tell? I really enjoy them, and I'm excited to start book 4, the Miserable Mill. I'm super excited. I have them on my desk, looking at me at all times like, read us. My favorite moment so far in the books is book 3. Book 3, my favorite moment is the kids are talking with Mr. Poe, who is their main guardian, I guess. The guy who's basically pushing them along between other guardians. And the kids are the kids are uncertain about seeing a new person. And Mr. Poe is like, "You kids are overreacting. Remember the time when you thought that Stefano was Count Olaf?" Stefano being the persona that Count Olaf took up on in the previous book to murder Monte. Spoilers. And he's like, "Remember when you thought Stefano was Count Olaf?" And the kids go, "But he was!" And freaking Mr. Poe literally lolls and goes, "That's not the point." The adults are so incompetent.